Keep the tweets coming in. It's at Richie Allen Show on Twitter, richie@richieallen.co.uk. 26 minutes past the hour. My great friend and colleague Michael Rivero standing by in Oahu. If you haven't done before, and I'm sure you have, check out whatreallyhappened.com. Top man and the host of the terrific, the brilliant What Really Happened radio show. It's coming up for 8:30 in the AM there in Oahu. Let's welcome back Michael Rivero. Welcome back, sir. How are you?
I'm doing quite well, thank you.
Listen, one of the things about you coming on is you're the only person I've never had to give advance warning of what we're going to talk about. And the thing about that is because you're an avid consumer, a voracious consumer of news from all over the world. So I'm going to start with something a bit left field today. What's going on in Connecticut and elsewhere when you can have state athletic championships and you can have 100-metre runs or dashes won by boys who identify as girls in record times, and the runner-up is won by a boy who now identifies as a girl, and nobody seems to know what's going to happen, or nobody seems to know what they can do about it, and the authorities say, well, look, this is just the way it is. Michael, this is Twilight Zone stuff. We're living in a mad world, aren't we? The world has gone crazy.
Yes, we are. We absolutely are. And this is all coming out of that liberal, politically correct nonsense where they think that if a boy wants to imagine he's a girl, that he's going to be a girl. But the hard reality is that it doesn't matter what hormone treatments this person takes or what surgery he undergoes. Genetically, he is still male. He has that additional muscle density and height advantage. And I know that the people who promote this policy are saying we're just trying to be fair to the transgenders. But what they don't realize is they're not being very fair to the girls who are girls, because after training for athletics and getting involved in school athletics, they're just being left out. They're literally being told it doesn't matter how hard you work. You know, you're probably not going to win this meet. And, you know, it's going to be this guy who says, I'm a girl. And it's an utterly ridiculous idea. And it proves that this whole politically correct liberal agenda, gender issue has just gone way, way, way too far.
And Michael, I've known Michael years. Michael is incredibly tolerant. He's got a live and let live attitude, as I do. Live and believe what you want, but you can't inflict it on people. What's interesting, Michael, is one of the parents, I think she summed it up brilliantly. She said sports are set up for fairness. Biologically, yes, male and females are different. But then she said the great majority is being sacrificed for the minority. Now, most people, or people who don't listen to independent media, they don't understand the enormity of that sentence. The majority is being sacrificed for the minority. Is there a more sinister agenda there? Why would governments want to sacrifice the rights of the majority for a tiny minority?
Well, I don't think it's about sacrificing the rights. I think that's a side effect. But what I think all this nonsense about gender is all about is getting everybody confused about who they really are. And it's the same agenda that we see behind this ridiculous open borders idea that is flooding Europe and the United States with all these refugees to tremendous detriment to the indigenous societies. And it's all part of this push for a one world government. And as part of that program, they want to destroy everybody's sense of regional, cultural history, their sense of identity. They want us so confused about who we are that we don't even know what bathroom we're supposed to use, so that will be much easier to control. And I think that's really what's behind all of this nonsense.
Good stuff, Mike. Before we talk about obviously the big story of the week, which is the visit of Donald Trump to Singapore to meet with the North Korean leader, I'm fascinated to get your take on that. Before that, a story broke this afternoon here. I'm sure you may have come across it. I know you're up at the crack of dawn, but to be fair to you, you might not have because of the time difference. But have you seen that story about how Dominique Lespard, who is the mayor of a North Paris town, he wanted to name a street in honour of the Palestinians, and he did do.
Yes.
Do you see this, Mike? Has there ever been a more glaring example of late of who's really running things in Europe in terms of the most prominent, the most powerful lobby there is in the UK and in Europe and in France? Here we have this mayor who was told he'll be bombed, he'll be murdered, he'll be killed. You can't put this street sign up. It was all vandalised. Eventually the French came along. French local authorities took it away. The Israeli Foreign Ministry and the ambassador said that this is basically supporting Hamas and supporting Palestine. And the street now won't be named after the Nakba, the catastrophe, as the Palestinians would call it. Great example, Michael, if you can't speak about Jewish power, because if you do, you'll be destroyed.
Yep.
In a word.
It is, and I did see it, and we did run it on my website.
How do you counter that, Mike? What do you do about that? I mean, obviously nobody in any position of authority in France is supporting this guy and the rights of that town, that suburb of Paris, to say one tiny little alley, we're going to name it, in solidarity with these beleaguered people. What do you do about that?
Well, you basically wait patiently, because if you look over the last 2,000 years of history about how Jewish groups relate to the societies around them, because they don't integrate, they don't blend in, they become very predatory. And there's a repeating cycle where they'll come on in, they'll start doing what they do, they'll try and take control, and then they'll push just far enough to trigger a public backlash. And that's what leads to this recurring cycles of pogroms and expulsions and repressions. And really, if you look at the last 2,000 years of all the history of so-called Jewish persecution, there's only one common denominator in any of it, and that's how those Jewish communities relate to the people around them. And it's not very pleasant at all. And we're seeing it again. Israel enjoys tremendous power and influence all around the globe, but people are now starting to notice, and they're getting very, very resentful. In the United States, people are looking at Nikki Haley up at the United Nations Security Council, just literally whoring herself for Israel. And it's an embarrassment. Same thing with Donald Trump, who clearly is not is giving Israel everything they want. He's moving the embassy. He's giving them more weapons. And we've got so many problems with our country that are being neglected by our president and a Congress that seem obsessed with Israel. We've got to do for Israel. God loves Israel, and we want to go to heaven, so we have to do whatever. And I don't know if it's because they're being bribed or blackmailed, or if they're really caught up in the religious belief that present-day Israel is somehow connected to the Hebrews described in the Bible. But it is true. The lobby is very powerful. Now, Al Jazeera did have a documentary about it in Great Britain that did succeed in airing. They did a similar documentary about the Israel lobby here in the United States, which has now been pulled from broadcast. It will not be released. Apparently, Qatar was threatened with serious repercussions, including the removal of the U.S. military base from which it derives a huge amount of revenue. And they went to Al Jazeera and said, you can't show this. You just cannot show this. It's
incredible. Not for nothing now, but I personally don't recognize. I mean, you said that, Jewish communities living among other communities, that they're predatory. And I'm not taking you on for saying that at all, but I want to say that's never been my experience. I've lived in very close proximity for years in London and here in Manchester to Jewish communities. And I can't find Jews, Mike, who in any way go along with the policies of the Israeli government. They despise it. And they're often at marches demonstrating against it. And, they listen to programs like this. And when I get, I sometimes get abuse from pro-Zionist Jews here in Manchester. They will weigh in and say, well, hang on a second, we agree with what he's saying. So that's not been my experience of Jewish people. It's been nothing but positive, I would say.
We're talking about, back in medieval and Renaissance times, and of course in the Weimar Republic, which was a big reason for that dust up over there. But you're absolutely right, especially here in America. Jewish people are appalled by what the government of Israel has been doing. And if you look at the continuing global condemnation over the Bloody Monday massacre, I like to equate it to the Amritsar massacre in India, which historians now identify as the point at which British control over India began to slip away. And I think that Bloody Monday massacre and the absolute absence of any regrets over what Israel did, I think that was a bridge too far for a lot of people. And they're speaking out, and they're not going to be cowed into silence with screams of anti-Semite and Jew hater, because it is simply too much to take. And American Jews are looking at what Israel is doing, and they understand, because Israel deliberately tries to portray itself as representing all of the world's Jewish people, then what the government of Israel does reflects on them. The public says, okay, if Israel represents all the world's Jewish people and Israel is committing these atrocities and war crimes, then all the world's Jewish people must be part of it. But as you point out, no, they're starting to separate and they're starting to break away. This is actually very hard for them to do, because it's part of the Jewish faith that you do not criticize your fellow Jew in public. So for some of these people to speak out, and I'm talking about rabbis who have come on out saying that what Israel is doing in Gaza is absolutely wrong, it takes a great deal of personal courage.
Absolutely, Mike. And Orthodox Jews, of course, have forever disagreed with the state of Israel's right to be there. They don't believe it should be there. This is important stuff. Michael Rivero is our guest live from Oahu in Hawaii. Check out whatreallyhappened.com if you haven't before. It's a must look website, bookmark it. Do that instantly if you're listening online. Michael, what do you reckon to the meeting between Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un, and of course equally as fascinating as that meeting and what might be really going on is the media coverage of it? What do you think of it?
Well, first of all, the summit itself appears to be more theater than anything else. And to be very honest, Kim Jong-un walked away from that summit with his own personal prestige greatly elevated by having had a one-on-one meeting with the President of the United States of America, and especially in the Asian part of the world. That sort of thing is very, very important. So as far as their little note that they signed, it's a bunch of promises, but nothing has really changed at this point. But all of a sudden, Donald Trump says the nuclear threat is over. And you almost get a sense that he was there to grandstand and put on a show, because we're finding out just now that the diplomats that are being sent to negotiate with the North Korean officials about some actual implementation are Mike Pompeo and John Bolton, two people who never wanted this deal to happen anyway. So I think this idea of the summit it certainly helped Kim Jong-un's global image, not to mention the image with his own people. It certainly made Trump look good. It got him nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. But I'm not sure that we're out of the woods yet with this idea that the North Korean war might not still be on the line here. I think the only thing that's going to stop that is if North and South Korea reunify, which they have been talking about, and that would end the U.S. Legitimacy of being in South Korea. But Mike Pompeo was already saying it's a 2.5-year timeline for full denuclearization of North Korea. So that gives North and South Korea 2.5 years to reunify and say we're now one country.
Mike, this is great stuff, because I've been wondering over the last couple of days, is this what the puppet masters, the globalists, the massive banksters, is this what they want, Mike? They want the Korean Peninsula to unite because they want to rape and pillage North Korea effectively.
Well, that's part of it. And you already have a lot of investors who are looking at the opening up of the Korean economy as an opportunity to go on in and start mining some of these rare earth elements and things like lithium, which are in abundance in North Korea.
Now, you've been following events in that part, because it's in your neck of the woods, of course. It is kind of, isn't it? I know it's still thousands of miles away, but you're closer to it than most of us. I've been back in the days when I was making commercial radio programs, producing and presenting them. Back in the days when I was a progressive, Mike, sadly, I don't ever deny it, and I got my rip and read stories, and I believed everything I was handed by Associated Press, as every other journalist like me did, until we woke up. You hear all these stories all the time about how desperate things are in North Korea for the North Korean people. Now, I'm guessing things are probably not great, but what is the truth, Mike? Is it, as Amnesty International says on the one hand, that it is a living Dante-type hell for North Koreans, or is it something less than that? What do you understand life to be like, these labour camps, imprisonment? What's going on in that country?
Well, we know that every time the United States starts setting up a country to be invaded, we are bombarded with propaganda about how conditions are terrible in there, how we have to rescue those poor people from their evil leadership. And then after the war is over, we find out it was all lies and propaganda. At this point, given that the U.S. government is now openly admitting that they're propagandizing the American people, it would be very unwise to just take at face value any claims being made by government spokespeople or the corporate media. Now, conditions in North Korea are certainly bad because they've been isolated and cut off since the armistice was signed in the Korean War. But I'm sure that Kim Jong-un would love to move into the 21st century. Apparently, he was very impressed by what he saw down in Singapore, and he would like to see some economic engagement. The problem is that the U.S. has been displaying this continuing belligerence against North Korea ever since the beginning of the Korean War, which now counts technically as the longest war in U.S. history. Of course, for most of that 60 years, nothing's been going on because of the ceasefire and the DMZ. But North and South Korea have been talking for years about reunification. And I think that, more than anything else, would start to improve conditions in North Korea, because North Korea has raw materials South Korea's manufacturing wants. And South Korea, of course, has improved products and economic support that North Korea wants. So I think it would be generally a good idea. There are forces who oppose it, though. And that is because of China's One Road, One Belt initiative to build this massive transportation corridor all the way across Asia and into Europe. And they also want to run a line of it down into South Korea, so that South Korea's manufactured goods can be taken to Europe in just 36 hours' time. That's how fast the One Road, One Belt will go. Obviously, for nations that have a large shipping industry, they don't want that to happen. They want North Korea to basically continue to be a roadblock to China extending the One Belt, One Road down into South Korea. So it's a complex situation, and there are a lot of players.
Good stuff, Mike. Story that's caught my attention today, and I don't know much about it. I'm sure you've been following it today. Who's Tim Draper, Michael, and why does he want to split California into 3 separate states? And I don't, maybe that's very, very unlikely to happen, but who would benefit? Who would want California to split into 3 separate states? What's that all about? It's an interesting story, this.
Well, there actually has been talk about breaking California up in the past. Last time it was about 2 states, Northern California, Southern California. And the argument was that California has become too populous and too complicated to be governed by the existing state government. That's always the rationale given. But what seems to be behind this, this is definitely a liberal agenda, is they want to break Los Angeles into California into 3 different states, which it would then become ethnic preserves. Right. They would flood the illegal immigrants into one area, refugees would go into another. California is already seeing a huge amount of white flight because of the water restrictions, which are getting very ridiculous, and the extraordinarily high taxes. Now, the people behind this move are saying this will lower taxes and improve our infrastructure. I'm not sure how they're getting from point A to point B. I think it's just a desire by people in Southern California and maybe Central California to be their own states, because they've never felt that Northern California, Sacramento, was being responsive to them, especially that Central Valley agricultural area.
That's very interesting.
They've always felt slighted by Sacramento.
There's an Eagles song in there somewhere, Michael. That's very, very interesting, that. Michael Rivero is our guest. We've got Mike for another probably 5, 6, maybe 10 minutes max. Mike's got his own show to prepare, of course, whatreallyhappened.com. Check it out. Follow Mike on Twitter as well, at WRH_Rivero is where you can get Mike on Twitter if you're not following him already. Speaking of water shortages in California, this always interests me. As far as you know, Michael, are massive companies like Nestlé, are they still buying thousands of gallons of water for pennies on the dollar, bottling it and selling it while there's a drought ongoing in that state? Is that still going on?
Yes, it's still going on.
Wow.
And it's not thousands of gallons. It's millions and billions of gallons. They're paying pennies for it all. And then they'll bottle it up and resell it, obviously, at a huge markup. And the CEO of Nestle has made no secret of the fact that he does not think water should be a basic human right, that it should be commoditized and corporatized and sold at a profit. Next, they'll start saying, we're going to do that with air. We're going to bottle up all the air, and you'll have to pay us an air bill every month to go on breathing. That's how ridiculous this is. But yeah, Nestle is still getting all that water out of the California aquifers. And California is in serious trouble with water because some of their aquifers have now become contaminated with fluids from fracking operations, making them not safe for humans to drink. They floated the idea of using that water for agriculture, but of course those fracking contaminants will get into the food and get into the human beings that way as well. Then you have the fact that the water infrastructure is itself in poor repair. There are cracks in the water mains dumping millions of gallons of usable water into the desert, into the dirt underneath Los Angeles. It's just not being taken care of. And worse, it has not been enlarged to deal with this massive increase in population resulting from the flood of illegal immigrants and refugees coming into California. It's an all-around mess. And they've just imposed these incredibly tight water restrictions where you're only allowed enough water every day to either have a shower or do a load of laundry, but not both.
How
if you
widespread,
go over
Mike?
that, you're going to be fined.
How widespread is that now in terms of, is that statewide or is it in certain difficult areas?
I think it's been imposed pretty much statewide.
And of course the $64 million question is, does the average Californian know? Now I had a figure. They get around 500 gallons of water for just under $1. This is disgusting beyond belief. This is what they get, 500 gallons for under $1. I can hear you checking that there. That's the latest. Well, that's the last figure I read. Does the average Californian know that, Mike?
I would hope that they would know that, and I imagine that probably some Californians do know that because there has been a big fuss kicked up about these bottled water companies just having this incredible deal to get all this water and just literally suck California dry. And they're not just doing it in California, they're doing it everywhere else. They're literally making these sweetheart deals with local governments. They grab the water resources, pump it out of the ground, put it in a bottle, and sell it back to the people at a hugely marked up price. And people who are aware that this is going on, they're very angry, and they have a right to be angry.
Tell you what, Mike, when you hear stuff like that, I think the first time I ever spoke about it was with you several years ago. When you hear stuff like that, you can't understand why people have not gotten the pitchforks and the torches, Mike. I mean, how do people put up with this? Yeah, I can't get my head around it. How can you accept and allow a multinational corporation to take hundreds of gallons? As you said, it's millions, but they get about 500 for under $1 and then sell it back to you for $1.50 for 500 for a half a litre. Why are people not marching, Mike?
They really ought to be. I think the time has come for people to start. A lot of this is going on the internet. The protests are more virtual than real. But I think maybe it's time, in response not just to this, but to a lot of things, it's time for people to start getting on out there and start saying, we are not happy with the way things are being run around here. We're not happy about the way our government favors large corporations and the state of Israel over we, the legal citizens. We're not happy how the government favors the illegal immigrants and refugees over we, the legal citizens. And it is time for people to start getting angry, I think.
Too right, Mike. Final question on that. Final question for today, and thanks again for coming back. I've had researchers on in the past, people I have a lot of time for, and they see what you've just been describing there as part of an Agenda 21, Agenda 30 scenario, and they believe that coastal areas and rural areas have been earmarked for depopulation. Do you go along with that?
Yes, I understand that was part of the Agenda 30. They want to herd all of the human beings into giant megacities where we're easier to surveil, easier to control, easier to tax. Basically, they're going to be giant human ranches, and they want to basically depopulate these rural areas and coastal areas, ostensibly as nature preserves. But the rich and wealthy people are going to be living there. And that's just the way it's going to work on out. We're heading into a very dystopian future, and it's kind of frustrating because when I was a kid growing up, and I'd watch the Disney World of Color, and they would always show Tomorrowland and how beautiful tomorrow was going to be. And while the technology has certainly kept up with those predictions, the actual sociology of the world we're living in has gone in an entirely different direction.
It's a bit like, people talk about Blade Runner, but I remember the old Buck Rogers in the 25th Century TV show, which I was a big fan of as a child. And
yes.
The world that he arrives in the 25th century, that horrible wasteland that the earth has become, that's where we're going, Mike. And it won't be 500 years from now either. It could be 50, it could be 60 years. It's dreadful. Folks, if you haven't checked Mike's radio show out before, check it out. It's absolutely fantastic. Go to whatreallyhappened.com. Mike, you were just about to say something, my friend. Last word to you. Go ahead.
I was just about to say, if we get into an actual real hot war with Russia and China that goes nuclear, we're going to have that desolate world just 6 months later.
Yeah, it's about time we started facing up to it and doing something about it. I agree with you. Michael, thanks, my friend. Have a great morning. Have a good show. And I look forward to speaking to you again next month.
I look forward to it again.
Cheers, Mike. The brilliant Michael Rivero, live from Oahu in Hawaii. The website is whatreallyhappened.com, and his radio show is unmissable. So check it out. Great stuff from Michael there. If not sobering stuff. Imagine the madness of that in California. When we first spoke about this years ago, this reality that Nestlé and others, I think Bechtel might have been one of the companies as well, maybe not, maybe so, were buying around about 500 gallons of water for less than $1 from the state of California, bottling it, putting a label on it of $1.50, and that was for half a litre, right? I don't know what half a litre is in gallons. And then the state is saying we've got a real water shortage here. Well, you can only have one shower a week. They're not saying one shower a week, but it's not far off it. You can't do this, you can't do that. You can't have a paddling pool for your baby in the front lawn because we said so, because there's a water shortage. And just around the corner, out of sight, massive corporations are spiriting away millions of gallons of water. This is a fucked up world, isn't it? Isn't it? Where are the pitchforks and the blazing torches? Burn these people out of their buildings. Not literally, don't kill them, but march to their buildings and tell them, if you don't leave, we're going to burn you out of there. It's unbelievable to me.